Hello and welcome inside the NFL team breakdowns of the national sports radio station here on Spreaker.com. Alongside Robert Dieters, the commissioner of the national sports. This is your host, Nick Rice, and no music here for tonight's show, but still should be a interesting discussion here. We are looking at the Miami Dolphins. We have the remainder of the AFC East already determined based off of our previous team breakdowns, and we've predicted every game of the entire season for something around 24 to 25 teams in the NFL. Now, later on tonight, we will take a look at what the San Francisco 49ers will have on tap. But in the meantime, Miami still is an interesting type of football team in and of its own right. We talk about a defense that has ranked top 10 for 3 consecutive seasons, and an offense that isn't half bad either. Free agent acquisitions and a plethora of offensive talent have finally balanced out what was a solid defense. But Robert, based off of an 8-8 campaign a season ago, are the Dolphins even as good as they were last season? I know there were a lot of guys that they had to release during last offseason.
I don't think this team is going to be the same as last year. I think the running back position they upgraded. I don't see Ryan Tannehill being the future for this squad just yet, but I like Mike Wallace and Brian Hartline. Those are 2 great guys to have on that offense as your wide receivers. But Nick, their whole offensive line situation last year with the incognito Jonathan Martin, I think that kind of maybe brought a lot of distractions to this squad, and maybe that's why they had this 8-8. And I thought this team would have maybe squeaked into the playoffs if this whole situation didn't come up, because they got so much publicity for it. And I just thought it was unnecessary, but now Jonathan Martin moves on to a different team. Incognito is a free agent, and I don't see Incognito playing in the NFL ever again. That's another discussion for another day. This team, though, let's look at their schedule. They were pretty much, this team was inconsistent. They win 3 straight, lose 4, win 1, lose 1, win 1, lose 1, win 3, lose 2. So this team went on some winning streak, went on 2 big winning streaks, and then kind of went on some also lost some hard ones too. Tampa Bay 22-19, Carolina 2016, Buffalo they got smashed, New York, I could agree they got smashed too, but versus Baltimore 26-23. And Nick, some of these wins were actually, some of them were blown out, some of them were pretty damn close.
A lot of them were pretty close, especially early on in the season. They were 3-0, and they had that wild win at home over the Atlanta Falcons that many people turned their heads in with these Miami Dolphins and were thinking, wow, this is definitely a team that at least has some sort of talent. But nobody, especially nobody in the expert department, looked at Miami as a team that can come out and contend for a deep run in the playoffs. This is a unit that only averages 20 points per game, which is towards the bottom of the league. And their running game was pretty atrocious last season. Now their defense carried the load. They were the third-ranked scoring defense in the NFL last season, which isn't half bad. And as you take a look at the statistics, you mentioned Ryan Tannehill. Well, he's a guy that only completed 60% of his passes, had 24 touchdowns, but 17 picks. The mistakes are crucial for a quarterback that's now entering I guess you could say a make-or-break season. It's his 3rd NFL year, and for a lot of guys, that is the telltale sign this coming season on whether the Miami Dolphins will stick with a Tannehill or move on to another quarterback. Do you think, you mentioned earlier that Tannehill may not be the answer. Well, if he isn't, what does Miami have to offer to any other quarterback?
I think that when they go in the draft, I think one guy you can maybe notice, and Nick, I don't know if you know him, Marcus Mariota out of Oregon. I think this is a quarterback to potentially help out a team that's in a state of just not maybe finding themselves just yet. And I think Marcus Mariota would be, I think this guy would be perfect for this job. He does have a wide receiver core to work with. He has a running back core to work with, Keyshawn Moreno and Lamar Miller. Those 2 are fighting pretty much for a starting spot. Who's going to be the main guy? That's really interesting to find out in this offseason. I think they have in this preseason, but, Nick, this team, it's just, their D-line isn't that great either. They allowed 58 sacks last year. the only reason why they lost to Buffalo is because that D-line was atrocious. And they just let that D-line just go by. And Tannehill I think that was like most of the games he got sacked. But, Nick, the defensive side, I like a little, to be honest, I think this defense and offense are kind of balanced in a way, but I don't really see these guys getting much of high grades. And, when you get 3 straight wins, 4 straight losses, blah, 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 and you have all this drama, I think I could see why this team could get an 8-8 record. I thought this team was going to do worse because they had to get pretty much a whole new left side. And that must be tough for a team that already has their, pretty much starting, like they already got their depth chart set. And then when you lose 2 starting guys, that's going to be awful for this team. They kind of bounced back in a way towards the end of the season. It kind of when that whole thing kind of just stopped. Versus New York, at Pittsburgh versus New England, they had a 3-game winning streak. I thought this team would have maybe gotten at least a 9-7 record, at least beat Buffalo or New York, but they couldn't do that.
Yeah, we mentioned some of the guys that are no longer there for the Miami Dolphins, and that in the number of people, that is basically numerous here for this Dolphins football team. When you take a look at the defensive side, one of the best overall units in the NFL, Brent Grimes was an amazing part of that, and I believe, they signed him to a longer-term deal. They do have a Cortland Finnegan there, but overall, I think this defense is... it's not a team that is filled with loads of playmakers. They have a couple guys that can make an impact. Cameron Wake, one of the better defensive linemen in the game. Donnell Ellerbe is not half bad. He led the team with 118 tackles. But, we may be looking too much into this, but I do think that overall this is a unit filled with a couple guys that can make plays, but it's not a defense that can be relied on, especially in back-to-back seasons where we don't expect a whole lot out of that offensive side of the football.
Also, one thing I didn't really, expect throughout the whole season, I thought that the rookie class, and this was probably, Nick, I gotta say, this is probably one of the worst NFL drafts that we've covered on this show. Deion Jordan was the number 1 pick. Played 16 games, 26 tackles, and 2 sacks, and really did not play a lot. This guy had a lot of high expectations. The Dolphins traded up to get him, and didn't really perform like what people would think he would. Then they got in James Taylor, and Nick, what his stats were last season, and it didn't really impress anybody either. So their stats overall, you look at these guys. James, and pretty much, he had played 9 games and had 3 tackles only. Jamar Taylor, my bad. Then you go to a Dallas Thomas and a Will Davis. And I gotta say, Will Davis was, I think that's so far your best pickup. Never mind. I don't know. I just think this draft class was awful. If I had to give them a grade, I think it's like a D because none of them really started at all. And I'm scared for this draft class. I think these guys could have gone up a little bit in the draft instead of getting the 19th overall pick in the 2014 draft.
Okay, well, I'm glad that you're very optimistic for this overall draft class. We're going to go ahead.
It's awful. Okay, tell me which guy made a huge impact on that 2013 draft class, because I'll tell you, Deion Jordan did not do squat. You got 2 sacks. Congratulations. But I understand it's a rookie season, but you should at least have a little bit better stats, especially if you're a guy that, I understand you have a lot of pressure on you because you got traded. The Miami Dolphins traded up to get you, and you played all 16 games. That's all you can give. A little disappointment just from me, and I know Jeremy Schnell, he's going to listen back to this. I won't be shocked, but I got to say, Jeremy, one of the biggest disappointments last season. The incognito thing, yes, that was a disappointment. Your draft class did not really do that much.
Well, personally, I felt like we could already tell that the number 1 overall selection, they traded up to Deion Jordan with the 3rd overall pick, and I didn't think that was all that good of a selection. I mean, I just thought that Deion Jordan was a late 1st, early 2nd round pick. He reminds you a lot of a D Ford. Could you imagine D Ford being selected 3rd overall? He was a guy that wasn't half bad in pass rushing, but as an overall defensive lineman, wasn't something I was impressed about. Some other guys that were taken by the Dolphins, Jamar Taylor, who only played 9 games for the Dolphins and had absolutely zero production there for the Dolphins. The only other notable pickup that they had last year was the guy that you were talking about, Deion Sims, who had 6 catches the entire season, and that was considered a good thing for them. So with two players that actually played notable starts for the Dolphins, the rest of their draft class were basically busts. I mean, you're talking Jamar Taylor, Dallas Thomas, and Will Davis were 3 of the other top draftees, and they barely even saw the football field. Definitely a peculiar situation, and there's only one player, that's a Deion Sims, who started a game, and he only started 1 at the tight end slot. So last year's draft wasn't good, and as we take a look at this year's draft, Robert, I'm sure you can agree that maybe they didn't do as good as they would have liked, especially with that 19th overall selection.
I mean, to look at this draft class, I mean, these guys got Jawan James, offensive tackle from Tennessee. I don't see him doing a lot. I mean, I understand your O-line struggled last season, especially trying to find team chemistry. Assumingly, he's not going to even start right now, and I think that's a little concern. Or actually, no, he was supposed to start at the right tackle position, but I think it was more the left side you need to worry about, not your right side. But I hope Jawan James makes an impact on this 2014 draft class. But I gotta say, Nick, a guy that I think I'm going to be impressed with, and their first pick was, I believe, not one of the best ones, but I gotta say your second overall pick in the 2014 draft is Javarius Landry, and I think this is a pick that you need, and I think it's going to help out Mike Wallace. I think it's going to help out the load, and he'll be that 3rd guy with Brian Hartline and Mike Wallace.
Yeah, actually, I'm taking a look overall at the draft history, which is why that the Dolphins have actually, when we talk about what Miami is doing, almost entirely it's based off of free agents, because I'm taking a look overall at what the Dolphins have done, and they only have 1 player on their roster, only one who they drafted who has gone to a Pro Bowl. And that is Mike Pouncey, the center for Miami. He is a great player, don't get me wrong, but to only have 1 player of which you drafted in your entire history, I looked over the last 15 years. All right, over your last, sorry about that. Over your last 15 years, definitely it's a far cry from what teams like the Patriots, teams like the Packers, I mean, far from successful in that category.
I mean, Nick, you put the Dolphins in a tough situation. I feel like the free agency is where they have to go to get all their pickups in the draft. I mean, it's kind of bust for them. I mean, I feel like they overpay their first round picks. Deion Jordan's supposed to be starting as he's supposed to be behind. Well, of course you're gonna be behind one of the best sack leaders in the game when you're behind Oliver Vernon, who had 11.5 sacks last season, but this guy could at least been thrown in a little bit more. But I mean, I understand when you're behind an Oliver Vernon, it's going to be tough. And Deion Jordan, one of the big disappointments, and also I gotta say, I mean, sorry if we're bouncing back to the 2013-2014 draft class, but this was one big disappointment. You have an outside linebacker, Dallas Thomas. He was the 3rd round. That was just major disappointment, and he had some issues on and off the field, and he didn't look like he was in sync. And it's kind of hard when you say this. Like, this wasn't a very good draft class. I'm scared that I feel like Jarvis Landry might not do anything either, but it all depends. I think Jarvis Landry, I think he's got to really do something for the squad this year. And everyone felt like Mike Wallace didn't really have that great of a season under Ryan Tannehill, which I can agree with. And I got to say the worst pick out of the on the 2014 draft class was Matt Hazel out of Coastal Carolina. I don't think he's going to make much of an impact. None of his measurements at the NFL Combine suggest he's even an above-average athlete. So that's just my opinion on Matt Hazel.
We're gonna excuse me, ladies and gentlemen. We're gonna go ahead and throw this Miami Dolphins team breakdowns into two parts. We'll be right back. Sorry for the breakup here, but we'll be right back to NFL team breakdowns. Apologize again for the break. We'll be back right after this. You're listening to the National Sports on Spreaker.com.